welcome to the channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. Similar to my video last night, which you guys are watching later. This is filmed on November 11th, 2024. Again, emphasis on the mom part. It is 9:37 at night. I would have filmed earlier, but my cat was being a cat and running in and out of the door of the office. So in this video, we're going to be continuing the Earth to the Moon. So this is, again, the TV miniseries that happened in 1998 that I did originally watch on television with my late mother. So this is the reason I have bought it. I do have it in Blu-ray. So we are going to be covering episodes. Let me double check here. I believe it's 6 and 7. Double check, but I'm almost positive it's 6 and 7. We're going to be covering Apollos 12 and 13 here. So, no, 7 and 8. Okay, so let's talk about episode 7 here. So the episode 7 is, that's all there is. So this is Apollo 12. So what happened here is this is a second manned moon mission. At this point, Apollo 11's already happened, so people are kind of bored. It's like, oh, we've already been to the moon. This is taking place in November of 1969, so several months later. It was moved back so once they landed on the moon, so they could get more training in geology. So the pilots, the 3 men here are Charles Pete Conrad. He is the commander and lunar module pilot Alan L. Bean, and command module pilot Richard F. Gordon. Now this entire episode is told from the perspective mostly of Alan L. Bean. So he was, and kind of how he talks about it, and I'm going to pull up Bean here in Wikipedia. So he was a part of the 3rd astronaut group. He had been rejected for the 2nd. He was part of the 3rd. And he was the only one to have yet to have gone into space. Of his group, a lot of them died, unfortunately, in various plane crashes. So he was backup, I believe, for one of the Gemini programs, but then they kind of sent him aside to work on the Skylab. But when one of the other astronauts scheduled for Apollo 12 unfortunately died, the commander of the group, Charles Pete Conrad, who had actually trained Alan Bean when I believe they were test pilots, requested him. So at least I think he actually requested him for backup. But they had known each other for years, so he, at least in the show, has Conrad showing up, seeing Bean, who's pretty much been shuffled off into a corner. It's like, hey, you want to join me and Gordon on trip to the moon? It's like, and he kind of freezes. It's like, yeah. Now, I was okay with how they did this, but the actor, who was the actor who played Bean in this? Let me make sure I'm in here. I didn't like the sound of his voice. Who is it here? It's David Foley. So he's a comedic actor. So he's playing Alan Bean. Pete Conrad is played by Paul McCrane, who, strangely enough, I'm mostly familiar with from ER. He was the one who ended up, the surgeon who was very much a dick, and lost his arm and then was dramatically killed by a falling helicopter. Yeah, that was him. And the other actor on board was Dick Gordon, who's played by Tom Verica, whose name I click on him here and figure out who the heck he is. I know I've noticed him from somewhere. Apparently he's in Bridgerton, and Die Hard too. If I've seen him in anything. Possibly The Closer. But looks like he's been in a bunch of stuff, which is probably the reason he was also in House at one point in time. But nonetheless. But this was Apollo 12. So again, it was told from Bean's point of view. And it is very much made clear that the public doesn't care that much about what's going on with these guys. So it very much focuses, the way they take it is, Bean is talking about the friendships, how close they were, the three of them, the mess ups that happened, and just kind of how they went through it. With the exception of the actor's voice, I enjoyed the way they did this. This was a fun, light episode of this because there wasn't really any major issues. There was one thing that happened that I'm sure is accurate. They know what they're doing when they were taking off, but where Alan Bean actually knew what Mission Control said because there was some sort of issues with, I think, one of their oxygen tanks, or not oxygen tanks, one of the other chemical tanks. I'm not a NASA astronaut. So basically, it's something that would mess up things on their way home. So obviously they were fine. They got home. And if I remember correctly, when I looked at Bean, he did, as did Conrad. They were both part of the Skylab. So Conrad went up first and then Bean followed. So he was in the second mission. And then he stayed at NASA for training and dealt with astronauts before retiring to be a painter. So yeah, Conrad ended up doing business, if I remember correctly. I can't remember what. I didn't look up what Gordon ended up doing. I think this was his last space flight. Let's see. This was his last. Yeah, he was the backup commander for 15. He was supposed to be the commander for 18, but it was canceled because of budget cuts. So this was his last flight. And he did work to design the space shuttle, and he retired in 72. And it looks like did was the vice president of the New Orleans Saints, the professional football club, and basically just did kind of business stuff after this. But this was an interesting episode. So the way they filmed it, I enjoyed it. Though again, Alan Bean's, the actor's voice was kind of irritating. It was probably accurate. He was from Texas. And in fact, I think all three of them were from Texas. They were all Southern boys. So that also might explain why on earth they were such good friends. But again, Bean became a painter. He'd already taken painting classes. He is a well-known artist. He retired to paint some of the scenes that he had seen. So that was the gist of Apollo 12. So now we're going to move on to Apollo 13. Now, how they handled Apollo 13 is they didn't show the astronauts at all. They focused on what was going on in the newsrooms. So that's what they were paying attention to. In fact, it was highly fictionalized here. Let me pull this up. So wrong one. We interrupt this program. So that's what, this is episode 8. The two main actors that you're focusing on, in fact, I have to go into, because they're fictionalized, the top cast here. Let me scroll down here. I have already found these once before. So you have the actor Jay Mohr, or Mohr, I do not know how to pronounce his name, who plays a young reporter by the name of Brett Hutchins. And then you have, let me scroll down to here and find him, the late Lane Smith, who's a well-known actor. He plays a character by the name of Emmett Seaborn, who is much older, similar to Cronkite's age, and you hear Walter Cronkite's name mentioned. If you do not know who Walter Cronkite is, I don't know where you've been living. He was literally the most well-known newscaster in the history of the world, or at least the United States. He was literally the most trusted voice in the United States for decades. So he was, I think, more than a talking head. He was very much trusted. But this Emmett Seaborn is competing with him. And then again, you have this up-and-comer named Brett Hutchins, who is again competing with him. So that's how they kind of do. They focus on the press when it comes to doing Apollo 13 and handling Apollo 13, which makes sense because we already had an entire film starring Tom Hanks on Apollo 13. Now Jim Lovell does show up in this series, different actor playing him because he was part of the Gemini program. And so you do see him, just not in this episode. You do not see any of the astronauts whatsoever. Everything you see takes place on Earth, in the control rooms, in the press rooms. So it's interesting. I understand why they did it this way, because again, they already did a film that had come out that covered Apollo 13 and what was going on with the astronauts. So they wanted to do a different perspective. So this renewed interest in the Apollo program. Now, you had seen Lane before. Lane has been part of this series, the actor, as this reporter. He is their Cronkite stand-in, because they weren't going to try to cast someone to play Walter Cronkite. So they have used Lane Smith in this older character as part of it. You saw him the previous seasons doing a lot of interviews and things. He's been there, again, Cronkite stand-in. So they use him, and then they use this much younger reporter and the conflict between them. Actually, at one point, the younger reporter pisses people off, and he does something that makes the program look bad. Again, this is the 60s and the 70s. The government and the press were still mostly, particularly when it comes to the space program, trying to working hand in hand to give out factual information. And this younger guy goes in and interviews, I think, one of the mothers of the astronauts, which he was told not to by NASA, to leave these families alone, and no, you're not supposed to be doing interviews. So they kind of blacklist him until one of the heads of NASA tells them not to. And they're like, why? And he's like, we can't afford to piss off networks. So it is kind of, that partnership is coming to an end. And it ends with basically the Cronkite stand-in Lane's character supposed to be getting a first interview after the guys have come home. And he had been at the station because he had been dragged there to give this kind of closing thing once they're home. And he does show quite a bit of emotion because, again, he's been following the Apollo program for years. He's interviewed these guys. But he gets there half an hour later, and the young guy is already going to do the interview. And now the younger guy says, it's like, I'll let you do it. You're supposed to do it. I'll let you do it. They hadn't started yet, but it shows his age in this scene. It shows that he is definitely getting older, and he doesn't have the energy or the power that he used to. And it's sad. You see this, and he steps back and just kind of leaves. He's not happy. He's just tired. So it's kind of an interesting way for them to show what's going on, but how they show Apollo 13. So it is very interesting. I think why I'm not sure how much I love this format, I understand why they did this for Apollo 13. Because again, they'd already done the film. Tom Hanks was in the film. So there was no point in showing that side of it again. And yes, Apollo 13 would have been, might have been dramatized a bit, but would have been extremely accurate just knowing Tom Hanks and how he is with these types of things. And then of course he does this project a bit later. So that is really it for these. These were very interesting. Again, this is what, 7? Yeah, 7 and 8. So we're going to be doing my next episodes, which are going to be jump back in here, are going to be 9 and 10. So the next one is episode 9, which should be interesting. So this is for Miles and Miles. This is Apollo 14. This is where you get Alan Shepard, who had fought his way back from health problems. So it's probably going to very much focus on him, and he's able to command Apollo 14. And then it goes into Apollo 15, which is the astronauts doing the background crew are doing a lot of geology training. So they start doing this. And then it jumps again to the last 2 episodes, which the first one focuses on the wives, and the last one focuses on the last trip to the moon. Hopefully, one of the bright stars in the next couple of years is maybe we'll go back to the moon. I would like to see that. I really would. As I mentioned in my last video, I looked up. My mother would have been 12. My father would have been 19. Because it was the summer. Both of them had fall birthdays. In fact, as I've mentioned before, my mother's birthday is in fact in December. That is the reason I will be from here on out covering mysteries in December, because that was her favorite. In fact, I'll do the calculations here to see how old my in-laws were in 1969. Try to think of when my mother-in-law was born. They would have been in their 20s when this happened, because they're older than my parents. In fact, my father-in-law is 80 this year, which means, let's see when he was born. He was born in 44. So let's see, 1969 subtract 1944. My father-in-law would have been 25 years old, so he was an adult, obviously, in his 20s. And my mother-in-law would have only been, she's older than my father. My father was the same age as her sister, but, trying to think. She's in her 70s. She would have been like 22, 23 at that time. So, trying to think. My husband's sister might have been alive at that time. Don't remember. The massive half-sister, 13 age difference. So, but that is when I find it, I would like to see us go back to the moon. I know we've already been there, but our technology is a lot different now. And to get women on the moon, African Americans on the moon, African American, Hispanic people of color on the moon, that would be cool. I wish we were having a black president right now. But we will see. Maybe next time. Let's see if we can survive the next 4 years. But nonetheless, let us focus on From the Earth to the Moon. We'll move on to focusing on some mystery stuff. And then in 2025, to escape the world, we're going to do fairy tales, and yeah, more fairy tales from around the world and Disney. So if you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. Check out the rest of my channel and leave a positive comment if you have one. Thank you.